Hey everyone, welcome back. In this devlog, I wanted to start off with the basic ideas for this tower defense. The end goal is to combine the roguelike loop of games like Slay the Spire or Monster Train with the tower defense. A merchant will visit in between each wave and offer a selection of options such as increased attack speed, your projectiles now deal splash damage, or the ability to purchase more towers. To get that started, I needed to work on a buff system. The attack range of a tower is something simple, and should be a good test bed for the system, so I start there. When I want to apply a buff, I simply call an event on the main tower, and if the buff is meant to be permanent, I just directly adjust the stat. If it isn't permanent, we adjust the stat, start a timer, and then remove it once it has been done. I then set up a left click to do a line trace to see if I hit a tower to apply one of these for testing. You can think of a line trace as firing a laser beam in a direction and seeing if you hit something. If you notice, I mess around with a few types of line trace. You can line trace for specific objects, but I didn't have any types to really check against. After stumbling around through the options and figuring out what was best, I ended up using line trace by channel. This requires to make a specific channel to test against and hook it up onto the collision I want to check. I then tell it the direction it should fire the ray. This takes into consideration the location of the camera and a node called Camera Mouse Location to World Space. This will give me a start for the line trace and tell it to aim the line trace where I click. While it looks like it is working great, spoilers, this buff system is very bad. Through further testing, a big problem appeared. If two of these events are called close together, the timer resets. What this means is that when two temporary buffs are applied close together, when it comes time to remove them, only one will be removed. A bit defeated, I chose to focus on something else, with the intent to revisit a future implementation later on. Here I am from the future. I stream working on these and more recently went through my third and hopefully final version of this buff system, so by far this has actually been the trickiest system to nail down. We need an actual wave system now. The plan for this tower defense is that waves will be generated on the fly, but before we can get there we need a system that spawns enemies on a delay and only a set amount of them. First, the spawning. When we spawn the enemy, we will set its location and which points it should follow, and just like that, there we go. They spawn, follow the path, and destroy themselves when they reach the end. Nice. Next up, health bars. We need to know how much health enemies have to see how well our towers are doing at defeating them. Without this information, it is difficult to gauge how well our setup is. To do this, we create something called a widget. This is a UI element that we can attach to our pawn. We added a progress bar to the scene, which will start full and fill less and less when damage occurs. After getting the sizing and some of the visuals on it the way I want, I start working on actually changing the fill rate. The plan is that when damage occurs, I can call this widget and give it a health value of the enemy it is attached to. With that, I can figure out the percent fill for this bar and update. Now when a projectile hits, we can see the enemy's health bar decrease. Now, if you're anything like me, watching the projectiles fly off the screen is fun, but it is a glaring problem that needs to be fixed. This occurs when a projectile target dies. It doesn't know what to do, so it just keeps flying off in a direction. We need to decide what it should do instead. Destroying the projectile when this happens is easy and makes sense, but I think it'll feel bad. Rather, I want the projectile to check within a range and see if there's anyone else it could switch to. Keeping this to a specific range will make it feel good when it swaps to a nearby target, but destroy it when it really shouldn't do anything or go towards something. To accomplish this, we do something very similar to towers. The projectile has a radius, and as targets collide with that radius, we add them to a tracked array. When we detect that they have lost a target, we loop through this array and find the nearest target and set them as our new target. We will repeat this loop until the projectile has collided with a target, or couldn't find a new target, and at which point it should disappear. After some debugging, you can see the result. It kind of works. When the projectiles are finding new targets, they sometimes skip all the way to the furthest target in range, or jump to an enemy they really shouldn't have been able to see. More debugging, and I don't see the problem clearly, so I do the next debugging step, simplify. I delete all the towers and focus on one, and suddenly the problem's much clearer. The tower is somehow seeing targets much further than its intended range, and now all I need to do is find out why. Going back to what changed since the first video, I noticed that I spawned the enemies at the origin of the world, which just so happens to be right next to that tower. They later get moved to the spawn point, but this moment they exist at origin means the tower sees them, and throws a wrench into the whole thing. Since we know the first location in the waypoints array is our spawn, let's just spawn them there instead. Excellent, they are only being added, and when I enable firing, it works just fine. Back to multiple towers. And there we go. We got wave spawning better set up, projectiles that redirect or destroy themselves, a way to track health on enemies, and some extra homework. How do I set up a buff system in Blueprints? If you enjoyed this, be sure to like and subscribe to see the next devlog. See you then.